This terrified the United States so greatly that the FBI New York Special Agent sent a letter to J. Edgar Hoover on December of 1964. He called for extra coverage and extra surveillance of Malcolm X's activities, since Malcolm intended to have the issue of the oppression of Black Americans brought before the United Nations. Just 2.5 months later, Malcolm was assassinated.
Malcolm X, a towering figure in the civil rights movement, left behind a legacy that continues to resonate 50 years after his untimely passing. His commitment to advocating for human rights, particularly for African Americans, remains a cornerstone of his influence. However, one aspect of Malcolm X's work that often goes overlooked is his unfinished agenda regarding human rights on a global scale, particularly his aspirations for engagement in the United Nations. Malcolm X's vision extended beyond the borders of the United States. He recognized that the struggles faced by African Americans were part of a broader global fight against oppression, inequality, and injustice. His advocacy for human rights encompassed a universal perspective that aimed to address the systemic issues affecting marginalized communities worldwide.
Malcolm, what is your purpose here? Well, my purpose here is to remind the African heads of state that there are 22 million of us in America who are also of African descent, and to remind them also that we are the victims of America's colonialism or American imperialism, and that our problem is not an American problem, it's a human problem. It's not a Negro problem, it's a problem of humanity. It's not a problem of civil rights, but a problem of human rights. And what do you hope for from this conference? Well, we hope to bring pressure upon them, or rather we hope to impress upon them the importance of their bringing pressure and world opinion upon the United States to take some meaningful effort to solve our problem in America. We want them to help us get our problem before the United Nations and charge America with violating our human rights in the same way that South Africa is charged with violating the human rights of our people in that area.
And what sort of reaction have you been getting from the African leaders?
Well, I've gotten a good reaction, a very sympathetic reaction, and an understanding reaction. Many of them have been misinformed by the American government into thinking that black people in America don't identify with Africa, and therefore they've restrained themselves from voicing their interest in our problem. But I've impressed upon them that our problem is their problem, as well as their problems are our problem.
One of the avenues through which Malcolm X sought to advance his human rights agenda was by engaging with international bodies like the United Nations. He believed that the UN could serve as a platform for amplifying the voices of those who were disenfranchised and oppressed, providing a forum for addressing human rights violations and advocating for meaningful change.
Well, for the past 10 years, the struggle in America has been confined to what has been projected to the public as a civil rights struggle. And in that context, it has remained a domestic problem. It has remained within the jurisdiction of the United States. And as such, it has been impossible for the Afro-Americans or American Negroes to try and enlist the support of other dark-skinned people who are being oppressed the world over in that struggle. And the difference now in the direction that the struggle is taking from the direction that the struggle has been going in the past, there are many of our people who are thinking more deeply and more broadly and are beginning to see the importance of lifting it out of the national context or out of the domestic context or beyond the jurisdiction of the United States government. And the only way this can be done is by internationalizing the problem and putting it at a level where it can be taken into the United Nations, and then all of the other independent nations on this earth can involve themselves in our struggle and support us. And the only way by which this can be done, instead of it being called civil rights in the future, we're going to have to label it a human rights struggle or the struggle for human rights. And as such, we can then take it into the United Nations through the avenues that have been set up by the United Nations Commission on Human Rights. We can take our problem before the United Nations in the same manner that the problem of South Africa, Angola, Mozambique, Hungary, the Arab refugee problem, it becomes a world problem. And as a world problem, then the Afro-American or the so-called Negroes for results because it's not left up to the one who's responsible for it anymore, but it's put at a level where the whole can see that our plight is wrong. It stood in our path in the past. It also makes a difference in the leadership. Those who have been posing as leaders of our people in America in the past, they can pose on this local stage where Uncle Sam is the master of the show and can prop them up and make them look good or make them look better than they actually are by giving them token gains and building them up an image. But when they step onto the international stage or the world stage, then Uncle Sam can't prop them up anymore. And their ability or lack of ability becomes exposed. And if they can lead us forward, they remain leaders. But if they can't, then they have to step aside and more qualified and bona fide leaders step up from the masses of our people, and then we get faster progress. We get more results. The Afro-American or American Negro intellectual perhaps permitted himself to be used in a way that wasn't really beneficial to the overall Afro-American struggle. But I think today these intellectuals have begun to undertake a new appraisal of the problem, are looking at it as it actually is, and are beginning to see it more in the international context and the relation that it has with the African struggle. And the African intellectual is beginning to look at the problem in the African context and see that what might be good in one country, in order for it to be used in another country, has to be rearranged. You take African socialism. Many of the African intellectuals that have analyzed the approach of socialism are beginning to see where the African has to use a form of socialism that fits into the African context, whereas the form that is used in a European country might be good for that particular European country. It doesn't fit as well into the African context. So I think the African intellectual is making that contribution, and he's making it well.
Malcolm X's efforts to bring attention to the plight of African Americans on the international stage were groundbreaking for their time. He understood the power of international solidarity in advancing the cause of human rights and sought to leverage global platforms to confront the deep-rooted inequalities that persisted both in the United States and around the world.
I want to take a moment to make sure everyone knows who Malcolm X was. Yes, he was a father, a husband, a community member, but he was also a man who genuinely fought for us and had a vision of what we could be. He shared his visions with us in speeches given in June of 1964 about how the problem of the black man needed to be taken away from the hands of the United States government and instead put before the United Nations, where he believed that this world body would be able to have the power to hold the United States accountable for the illegal and criminal injustices that they committed against their people. In January 1965, Malcolm said in an interview with the CBC, "We believe that our problem is not a violation of civil rights, but of human rights. Not only are we denied the right to be a citizen in the United States, we are denied the right to be a human being." Couldn't Malcolm have said these same words today? Haven't we seen the same forms of repression happen today? This is the legacy that we fight for the future Malcolm knew America could have. Federal and state agencies targeted Malcolm and described him as a black extremist, labeled black organizations as hate groups, and developed a systemic and illegal war on the black movement. Malcolm knew that these efforts to repress his justice movement existed, yet he remained steadfast, uncompromising and unwavering in his beliefs, and unapologetically proud to be black. This terrified the United States so greatly that the FBI New York Special Agent sent a letter to J. Edgar Hoover on December of 1964. He called for extra coverage and extra surveillance of Malcolm X's activities, since Malcolm intended to have the issue of the oppression of Black Americans brought before the United Nations. Just 2.5 months later, Malcolm was assassinated. In Malcolm's memory, we honor his legacy by remaining steadfast in our fight for justice for every single just cause, including his.
While Malcolm X's life was tragically cut short before he could fully realize his vision for global human rights advocacy, his legacy endures as a testament to the ongoing struggle for justice and inequality. His call for addressing systemic injustices and promoting human dignity reverberates through the generations, inspiring individuals and movements to continue the fight for a more just and equitable world. As we reflect on the enduring impact of Malcolm X's legacy 50 years after his passing, it is essential to recognize his unfinished work in the realm of human rights and his belief in the transformative power of international cooperation, particularly through the institutions like the United Nations. By embracing his universal vision for justice and equality, we honor his memory and reaffirm our commitment to building a more inclusive and compassionate world for all.